Hello, and welcome to the 2019 CMO virtual event, How to Effectively Acquire the Customers You Want. My name is Laura Loxamano with Argyle, and it's great to have everyone joining us today. I have a few administrative details to share with you, and then I'll turn things over to our esteemed speakers. First off, we'd like to thank Oracle for their partnership with today's event. They've been a wonderful thought leadership partner to Argyle and are committed to providing you with valuable content and an overall great experience. So thank you again to Oracle. We appreciate you joining us today. We welcome you to stay connected during today's event. For those of you who are active tweeters, please use the hashtag ArgyleCMO. You can also follow us on Twitter and be sure to join our LinkedIn group, CMO Forum. I also wanted to take a moment to touch on our content neutrality policy, which we've curated based on feedback that we've received over the years from our members. Argyle is proud and protective of this policy as it reflects our commitment to ensure the neutrality and overall value of the content presented at our events. We've worked closely with our speaking faculty to ensure that you receive a set of balanced and neutral viewpoints during this session today, and we appreciate our members' support of this policy. We do have an upcoming CMO Leadership Forum that may be of interest to you. We'll be in New York coming up on October 22nd. Finally, and most importantly, please submit any and all questions that come up during today's event in the Q&A section of the interface. Following the panel discussion, we've set aside time for our speakers to weigh in on these questions. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ray Owens, CEO of DX Marketing. We're very pleased to have Ray deliver some opening remarks. So over to you, Ray.
Thank you, Laura, and thank you, Bob, for the sponsorship with Oracle. Really appreciate it. Hello to everybody. I'm going to start the panel out with actually a short presentation specifically talking about today's topic, but more importantly, perhaps just some short and quick ideas on the topic itself. It's a pretty big bucket, but we got a couple of things we'd like to share with you and hopefully spur some thought. So just a quick introduction about DX Marketing. We are in our 27th year. We actually started as a targeted marketing company in direct mail, but have moved heavily into the digital space in the last 4 years. We built this sort of digital marketing platform to help our clients just with what we call enterprise-level data and analytics to really move their business forward. We work in different verticals. We have roughly 36 clients, but we call these episodic verticals for the reason that a lot of the purchasing and use of these different categories are what we call them episodic in nature, means you do them very often. And so when you do advanced analytics and good customer insights, really can drive engagement in these particular verticals. So let's get started talking about data. Obviously, being a data-centric company and a lot of you out there that use data to inform marketing decisions, we've really sort of distilled this down into what we think are 5 key areas that if you can use marketing effectively in all these particular ways, will really drive performance and better performance. I think all of us in the customer segmentation part have done profiles and personas over the years to figure out who's buying our product or service. Once we know that, we could go to the market potential and figure out what's still out there in the market to engage with our product or service, the potential. And then all the findings you get from these first 2 steps can really go into your messaging strategy, how to reach them, content to engage. And then the really big bucket is the acquisition and retention, all the different channels that you can use, obviously, for acquiring new customers, but also all the CRM-related activities that keep folks coming back over and over. And then finally, and we think one of the most important ways, and some of the things that we'll talk about today, performance measurement. And that's just how effective was our particular channel, particular campaigns, and did it drive engagement, and more importantly, did I effectively get new customers? So one of my favorite infographics that comes out each year addresses all the players and just how large the marketing landscape really is from a technology perspective and all the different players. This infographic comes out every year from chiefmartech.com. It was just updated in April of this year. But what it shows and what it reflects is the growth in the number of players in this space, in the marketing technology landscape. You can see from 2001, 8 years ago, roughly 150 companies, and then today sitting at 7,000. So it's a pretty big, pretty crowded space. But what I thought was interesting about this year's infographic was to look at the change from last year, 2018, to this year. The fact that the space was growing so quickly, and then it seems to be just in the last year, there's been a little bit of slowdown in the number of players in the space, just growing a little over 200 companies. And so I think some of this is due to some consolidation in the space. GDPR had a big effect, we know, with some more consolidation and some sunsetting of some companies. But anyway, just the fact that there's a lot of players, and how do we address them, specifically trying to grow our business and engage with customers. So this is the infographic from this particular year because they've divided them into different categories. And the slide's hard to read, but I put some labels on the panels to actually show you. They're broken down into all the different ad platforms that are out there. If you're using video, marketing automation, content, all the content providers, it's a pretty big bucket. Also social media, the influencers, customer experience, CRM platforms is another big space. E-commerce, sales automation, again, just more in terms of number of players. The data portion we're going to talk mostly about today, just from the data aggregators, business intelligence, visualization tools, and then finally, which is actually the lesser of all the categories, really is a lot that comes with workflow, collaboration, software, and finance. But to get back to talking about where can you, if you look at this space and exactly how many players there are, where do you focus to really gain insights and perhaps even better engagement? And we actually look right down here at the bottom of the data part where the DMPs reside, and the data management platforms. These are large data aggregators that actually house a lot of data that, one, can enhance the insights with what you're doing with your own customers, your own leads, but also engaging, reaching out, and trying to engage with these folks when they're showing in-market signals. So to talk specifically about that, when I was saying they're large aggregators, just to give you a point of reference of how large the number of data points that typically reside in a DMP or data management platform. If you think about all of us who have purchased lists or done personas or profiles with compiled lists with national consumer data, there could be anywhere from several hundred to maybe 1,000, 2,000 or 3,000 variables at the most. That's specifically addressing compiled lists, and these are the folks who actually compile data, data demographics and things of that nature. But when you get to the DMPs, the number of variables that are actually available, are just extremely large in terms of the number of data points. So most of these folks are actually aggregating and combining data from lots of different sources. That gives you the opportunity to, again, gain additional insights on your own data, your lead data, but also who's actually showing in-market signals out on in the marketplace. And just for full transparency, when using a DMP, the ways to really effectively use them is to, one, have a data set, obviously some kind of customer data platform or CRM. Maybe you're housing lots of lead data or access to U.S. compiled data. We do use Oracle's infrastructure, and what I'm going to talk to you about today in addressing DMPs is our experience around this particular tech stack. But more importantly, when you're actually engaging online with your own customers, if you're actually pushing them into DMPs, it's great to use an identity graph or some kind of on-ramping service, and there are several out there. But the important thing is you can push directly to social platforms and DMPs from your own file, but if you use an identity graph, you do gain more traction in terms of matching. You just get a higher match rate, and you're able to actually get more insights from the higher match rates. And then the DMPs themselves, as I mentioned, are typically aggregators of many, many different data providers that form and do things in an aggregated method, but also in a privacy-safe way, which we'll talk about. So, just to get right to the DMP and what it does, we've all built predictive models or have a persona, or we build prospects within our lead files. So, so we've identified them. We have this high propensity for this target audience to engage with us, but let's get a boost from the DMP. And so this is and this particular chart is just one screenshot of the tens of thousands of data points that are actually aggregated in the DMP. So when you push your data in to a data management platform, it's taking all of your data and it's aggregating it, and it's showing you things that are indexing by composition in ways of individual variables. For example, this happens to be a real estate client, 250,000 real estate prospects in our lead file that are showing high propensity for lots of different things. And in this particular case, these folks are buying organic half and half. We're seeing it 10 times the national average. There's lots of granular insights that come about this. But as I was talking about the privacy, what I like about the DMP is that it aggregates the data with a minimum observation. So if there's less than 3,000 observations, it won't show it to you. So you can't put 10 people in. You can't put 50 people in. You have to put large groups. So it aggregates and it protects privacy at the individual level. But and the flip side, the good side, is that it is giving you some really good insights into what they're doing, what they're purchasing, and more importantly, is it related to your particular product. So the other thing you do with the DMP, this is a different visualization just to illustrate how they work and how they work in different instances for different business verticals. So the right in the middle of the DMP is where you drop your data in, and then it attaches to the source data. Whoever's providing data into the DMP, it attaches to that particular source. And then many of the sources will actually have their own in-market signals or predictors or frequent transactors that tell you what's going on with the data itself. And then you extract the category that you're looking for your product or service. In this particular case, we're talking about automotive service care. So some of the relevant data points are age of the vehicle, particular brands that they visit, the predictors themselves from frequent purchasers. So all this data attaches to these nodes and creates in-market signals that allow you to push this data to whatever channel you're using for digital engagement. Same thing for short-term financing and the financial services. One of the things you get from the DMPs is it identifies look-back events that occur before using your product. So what events were happening prior to having a need for short-term financing. So there'll be all kinds of different events that might occur from the same sort of process. Also, telecom's another. It's not so much just that people search for things. It's really they're researching devices, they're researching plans. What are their attitudes towards technology? Are they early adopters? Do they use them frequently? Do they rely on them for certain things? So these are all insights, that you get to figure out why they're buying your product or service, but more importantly, to tag these same sort of behavioral signals for engagement if you want to reach out and actually talk to some of these folks. So if you think of the traditional marketing funnel, what really happens by being able to see these end-market signals with your own data, it allows you to move back up the marketing funnel a bit, because we all are doing search and paid search, and obviously that's a very important thing, a very important strategy. But if you can move back up the funnel just a bit and predispose your prospects to your product or service prior to, you'll find that branded searches and things of that nature happen. So the DMP can give you a boost by moving back up the funnel just a little bit. And one important thing, so if you're pushing audiences into, let's say, a programmatic channel, it gives you the opportunity to push in your own random control group. And this is important because if you're a mature brand and you know that you try to wonder, will they come in anyway, and you're doing your metrics, if you push a control group in, a physical control group with your audience, you can actually just serve them something unrelated to your brand, maybe a public service ad, maybe hold out the control group. But you can measure the effectiveness and the response rate of that control group against what happens with your campaign group. And what we're finding, the reason that's important when you're pushing these audiences in, if you look at the actual control group, especially if you're a mature brand, roughly 25 to up to 40% of the engagement you'll get, the responses you get, would have come in anyway. And it's good to know which of those you could have determined. And one of the illustrations is if you're using in-market signals, this happens to be a real estate client, and we're using the different signals. We're spending and we're getting clicks. Folks are filling out online lead forms, and we're measuring our cost per lead of just online engagement versus the folks who actually don't click on the ads but come in anyway. They visit the communities later. They do a branded search and look for the location later. That by being able to follow that, you'll see that we saw that the cost per lead drops exponentially to a lower amount just because of being able to follow those who didn't actually click. In fact, we found that roughly 88% of the folks who came out of the campaign to engage actually never clicked on the ads. And then even those who did click, 72% didn't fill out forms. So pushing this audiences, using the triggers from the DMP just gives you a better leg up on the attribution. Speaking of that, down to here to the last slide, is we use this what's called reality attribution perspective that Koki Yamaguchi put out. And so if you're pushing data into these different channels, and if you think about click metrics, last touch, first touch, decay, those things, those are okay, but if you're actually controlling the data within each of the digital channels, you just get a much better view at the data-driven attribution from the campaign. But the reality of it is, and I get back to that, if you're a mature brand, you know, brand equity has a big effect on the response. Price and promotion, if you've launched a new product or an update to a product, has a lot of effect. So does local store marketing efforts, and so does word of mouth. But the actual engagement from measuring the incremental value, accounting for a control group, it all gives you a much better perspective on the effectiveness of the channels themselves. And at the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to achieve here. If we push an audience to our social account, push an audience to programmatic, even do some direct mail with the same audiences, being able to track them, we can see the effectiveness of each channel, the overlap, and then how the actual campaigns came out, not from an efficiency perspective, but more effectiveness. Because at the end of the day, it's the return on investment that's greater than the cost per thousand or the CPM, we say. And did you lower your cost of acquisition, and not just the CPM? So that's my kickoff to all things data, really talking about how to effectively use a DMP that sits inside a very busy marketing tech landscape. And I'll turn it over to Bob Dutcher, who's going to chair our panel today.
Thank you, Ray. So my name is Bob Dutcher. I am Vice President of Product Marketing for Analytics and Big Data at Oracle. I have over 20 years of experience in analytic data and data science solutions. Joining me today, I have a panel of 4 individuals. Of course, Ray Owens from DX Marketing, who just spoke. I have Dana Troker from Simon & Schuster, Amy Como from Emory Health, and Chris Barlow from Webster Bank. Dana, could you introduce yourself briefly?
Sure. Hi, everyone. This is Dana Trocker. I'm the marketing director at Atria Books, which is an imprint of Simon & Schuster Publishers. I run a team of marketers here who we collectively work on 150 individual book campaigns per year, which is an astronomical number of individual campaigns. And we do quite a bit of different marketing tactics, both direct to consumer as well as into the industry. And we're actually in the process of building the data side of our business, so I'm happy to address that later on.
Thank you, Dana. And Amy, could you do a quick introduction of yourself as well?
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Amy Camo. I'm Vice President of Marketing for Emory Healthcare. For those of you who may not be familiar with us, we are the largest healthcare system in the state of Georgia, probably most recently known for our caring for the first U.S. patients with Ebola a few years ago, although we have many more claims to fame than that. But I lead a team here that is really focused on patient acquisition, retention, and loyalty. Fairly certain in the patient space, but we also do a good bit of B2B marketing too, because a lot of our business is driven from physician referrals. So we have a good mix of consumer and B2B marketing that we handle here. And then just of interest, before joining Emory, I spent 10 years in the performing arts doing a lot of marketing around single ticket and subscription sales. So I'm very familiar with patient retention, loyalty, and conversion in that industry as well.
Thank you, Amy. Chris, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Chris Barlow. I am Vice President of Mobile Banking here at Webster Bank. For those of you who may not be familiar, we are a regional bank in the Northeast, headquartered in Connecticut. Our footprint extends from just north of New York City through Connecticut, Rhode Island, and into the Boston area. I'm responsible for managing and evangelizing the mobile channel here at the bank, working to make sure that we grow the adoption of mobile internally with our consumers, as well as being able to grow our base with non-consumers as well.
Thanks, Chris. And of course, everybody knows Ray from his presentation. But Ray, for those that may have missed your initial introduction, could you introduce yourself as well?
Sure. Ray Owens, the CEO, founder of DX Marketing. We're a 27-year-old company from Savannah, Georgia, and Greenville, South Carolina. And happy to be on it today.
Thanks, Ray. So for our first question, let's start off with you, Dana. What types of marketing tools does your organization currently use, and what kind of benefits do these provide?
So as I mentioned, we're in the process of actually getting access to a lot more data. Our company has been tracking analytics on the corporate side for quite a long time, but now my team of title marketers who are responsible for marketing specific books out into the world, they're just getting access to some tools where they're actually able to dig into some data to help them figure out, how to move forward with their campaigns. So we're now we're just now starting to be able to analyze inbound traffic to our website. So they're able to see if we're driving from newsletter, if we're driving from our advertising, if we're driving from social media, and they're able to sort of track their campaigns in a way that they have not yet been able to. So this is actually really exciting for us. And we're also rolling out quite a bit more social listening capabilities. So they're able to find out what messages are resonating with which consumers, to sort of track which media hits are having the most impact on sales. So we're sort of in this very exciting period where we're building this piece of our campaign.
Excellent. Would some of the other panelists, what kind of tools are you utilizing, and what are some of the benefits that you're seeing?
Hey, this is Amy from Emory again. One of the things that we've talked about, and I know that Ray mentioned it earlier in his presentation, around segmentation and persona modeling. We've been doing target audience modeling for a long time by taking a look at our existing patients and modeling them based on household income, their zip codes, their payer mix, and then we've been running those through sort of some of the traditional psychographic analyses that I think many of you are using to really develop a persona. And we've done that for a number of years, but what's different in the past 2 years is that we've partnered with a different research firm that actually has has personas based off of actual healthcare behavior. So somebody that's 35, a female that's 35 with the same household income, they may have very different health needs based off of a variety of different factors. And so we're able to use this segmentation to create healthcare-based personas so that we're able to better target and then create creative and messaging and use the right tools that are going to target those folks wherever they may be on a basis of their healthcare persona and their either readiness to receive healthcare messaging or not, and how we would tailor our efforts to on those specific factors.
Thank you. So, Chris, Ray talked about how his organization, how organizations are leveraging data management platforms. I think the audience would be interested in hearing about how your organization uses analytics to understand and predict customer behavior.
Sure. I think from our perspective, we're really focused on our existing customer behavior. And as I mentioned kind of in the opening, what we're trying to do is to grow adoption of digital and specifically mobile for me within our existing customer base. So a lot of what we do is look to try and make sure that we model. We do use some personas and really kind of understand both from an asset perspective, a demographic perspective, and a usage perspective about what things make the most sense. A little obvious, but as we're talking about doing in marketing certain features like mobile deposit, we may have a different message for baby boomers than we do for millennials. So that might be one good example. But again, we look at trying to optimize and understand the behavior of our existing customers and work to market and upsell or look to cross-sell around those individual pieces of functionality that we think make most sense to in order to grow our adoption and our usage.
Thanks. And Amy, I understand that you're doing some interesting stuff with around customer behavior as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I alluded to it a little bit there as we were looking at our segmentation around healthcare behavior. As I said, what's very interesting is that there are different types of, there are about 9 or 10 different types of healthcare behaviors out there, and we all fall into one. And you typically don't change based off of it doesn't change as your demographics change, right? So as you age, it doesn't necessarily change. So you have a higher household income, it doesn't always change. And so we're looking at that to figure out sort of who are the optimal folks that we should be targeting, but then also knowing that as a healthcare organization, while we may want to target a specific type of persona because they're most apt to need primary care or need a mammogram, that as a health system we serve all needs, right? We serve people at all levels, and so although we may have a single target audience, that doesn't mean that all of our customers fall into certain target audiences. In fact, they fall into one of those 10 different categories. And so as what we're learning from that, and really sort of falls into the engagement side of customer engagement side of the house, is that how we engage with our customers when they're here based off of their healthcare persona can really have a distinct impact on actually their outcomes. So, talking to different people in different ways. Some of us are visual learners, some of us are, want to read, but if we can figure out how to identify those types of folks coming in, we can help them with their healthcare education in order to have better outcomes. And so therefore that makes them a more engaged customer and helps us lead to those retention and loyalty aspects that we're really starting to build in our organization. So really change it from just acquisition, but then how can we engage them and keep them satisfied, but then also improve their health at the same time.
That's excellent. Now, Ray, it sounds like from your presentation that you've worked with lots and lots of customers across the board, so you have a lot of experience seeing a lot of different things. I know a lot of your presentation, you already spoke a little bit about the use of understanding and predicting customer behavior. Is there anything else that you could maybe that you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure. I think Amy was speaking to it too. We're seeing, especially these days, that a lot of the survey panels that are out there are growing in size, and there's this sort of influx of attitudinal data that's coming in with just traditional demographics and spending habits and things of that nature. And Amy was talking about that. Really attitudes towards healthcare, but some of this attitudinal data that we're seeing, we're starting to sort of cross-pollinate across different verticals because there's just a larger prodigious amount out there. So for our real estate clients, we can see what's driving engagement on the West is different from the East or the Southeast. What is it they're looking for in a home purchase? And so just the attitudinal data is something that we've seen grow and again, be more, I think, that's more scalable. It's extrapolated into larger populations. That's been really a benefit, but mainly for the messaging and the way to reach out with content. If you can figure out why folks are doing things a certain way or purchasing a certain way, it gets you a lot closer to that end engagement and really more effective communication.
And that actually speaks to one of the things that I've seen out there, which is there's just this massive growth of data. The amount of data that's actually available is I actually like to say a lot of times that it isn't a problem that a lot of times that companies don't have the data. It's that they have almost, in many cases, too much data. So is there any best practices that the panel could share to kind of to efficiently and effectively sift through all that data and find the information that's most valuable to better connect with your customers?
Sure, I'll take that one.
This
is Chris Barlow again. Go ahead, Amy. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Chris. No, go ahead, Chris.
Sure. Yeah, I'll take that one. I think for us, we really want to look at what our revenue drivers are and what are going to drive some of our internal metrics that we're trying to reach each quarter and each year. So really kind of understanding a lot of what a lot of people talked about already. Ray talked about how home buying attitudes are around different regions of the country. For us, it's really kind of around money movement, what kinds of assets make sense for particular products, and probably an interesting one might be just looking through and mining that data. So as an example, since we're a bank, we can see where people are making payments to competitors or other financial instruments or credit cards as an example. So we may want to have a targeted campaign for another local bank that's in our area where we're seeing people are making payments to them, and then we can say, hey, we've got a specific offer that really meets our needs, again, that drives our acquisition for that particular product.
Thanks, Chris. And Amy, it sounded like you had some interesting information to share.
That was actually Dana, so I'll defer to Dana.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dana.
No worries. Two ladies,
okay.
hard to tell who's who.
Yeah. Actually, I think, both Chris and Ray hit on two pieces of information that I think are really helpful to us, which is why are people doing what they are doing? So what is the behavior that we have noticed? And what are we noticing in our competition? So we do quite a bit of watching and listening, particularly with books. It's a great example. People finish one and move on to the next. So who is the audience that we're trying to reach, and what are they already responding to, and what do we have to say to them to get them over to see what we are doing? So we spend a year leading up to actually marketing a specific title, listening to what people are saying about other titles, finding out where they're going to talk about them. Why does one book take off instead of another? Why is there a phenomenon book that everyone seems to be reading, and how do we talk about our product that brings them over to us? So a lot of what we're doing is watching the competition, looking for opportunities, and then growing in the audience that we already have by, attracting people from a similar audience.
Thanks, Dana. And Amy, maybe you could share a little bit what you're doing over at Emory Health.
Yeah, I think that the key is there's so much data out there, and I always joke we're a healthcare system, right? So we've got a lot of researchers and scientists, and so we actually have more data probably than we, as we said, there's so much data out there. How do you figure out what's what? And then once we do settle on a data set, we love to debate whether it's valid or the right data set or not. And so you can get lost in a sea of of trying to find perfect, and instead, I recommend really focusing on what are one or two things that you can track easily and consistently, and start tracking those and learn from them, and then add on. But if you try and if you're just getting started or you're early in your journey, you try and tackle too much, you'll find, I think, that you're in a debate around whether the data is valid, and not do anything instead of actually just taking a few pieces of data and measure them. So for us, we do a lot of measurement of our call center, right? So calls coming in for inquiries or appointments, and then we also separately work with our different sections or hospitals to understand what the patient appointments are. We don't have direct attribution yet there, and I know that's probably a later topic, but we can start to see correlation when we overlay our marketing activity on top of that, and that's where you got to start, and then you can start to get into more of the direct attribution if you don't have that basic sort of that foundation built.
Thanks. So one of the other things that I see is fairly important is around segmentation and segmenting. So Amy, could you share some of the strategies that you use for segmenting your customers and using the data that you already have?
Yeah, so I'll give you actually a really good example of something we did a few years ago. So one of the treatments we provide is a treatment for varicose veins. And we had noticed that people weren't coming to our seminars as much as they had in the past. So we did I did an analysis of all of our existing patients for that procedure over the course of we did a 2 or 3 year retrospective to see where they were coming from, what zip codes, but then also did some psychographic analysis to understand what sort of personas they fall into. And then we did the old school bought lists based off of those personas to drive them into seminars, but we only bought for those areas that were had high propensity versus sending it to, doing too broad of a send. So that helped us with obviously our spend and our efficiency. And by doing that, we saw that our attendance rate, our responsive rate went up. And then we also were able to see that our volumes were able to go up because we were bringing in a higher qualified customer. And so that's something that we've done sort of old school, right, with direct mail and analyzing our own data, but now you can take that even further now that we have all these 7,000 plus tools and partners out there in the digital space to take it even further.
And Chris, what are you doing around segmentation?
Again, I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, but really kind of looking to see who's got a propensity to use digital specifically. What do those look like? What do they look like? How do we want to make sure that we message to them? Again, I'll kind of bring up the whole thing around making sure that we target millennials for use of mobile deposit or mobile banking specifically, maybe a little bit differently than we are for some of our baby boomer folks, but at the same time really kind of thinking about what those actual demonstrated behaviors are, and making sure that we do a good job of targeting those folks, getting the right message to them in the right hands, and making sure that we track what actions they take off of that.
Thank you. So, Amy, in your opinion, what are some of the most important interaction attributes and KPIs in general that marketers need to analyze? What are some of the key things that you look at?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned a little bit before, for us, the holy grail, if you want to call it, is that true attribution, right? And in healthcare, it's tough because of privacy laws and how much we can track on an individualized basis. But, as I mentioned, we can get correlation, but we're now working on building is causation, right? So did what tactic drive this call or this online appointment request? And then did that person actually show up for the appointment? And then did they, have the procedure if that's what we were trying to market? And so we call it a lot here of conversion math and trying to figure out, all right, well, how many? If one of my physicians says, hey, Amy, I need to, acquire this many surgeries in the next fiscal year, we can say, all right, well, if you're going for 100 surgeries, that through our analysis, when we can get there is, all right, well, then how many appointments do I need, and then how many phone calls or online appointment requests do I need to get to those appointments, and then how many impressions or clicks or curiosity conversions do I need at the top of the funnel to generate that, and then that helps us build it. And so we work on each of those individually, but where we can really start to identify and build that true attribution model is going to be key for us. So I think you have to be looking at what are your leads, and then your leading indicators, but then what are your conversions and or your volumes, whatever your volume may be, whether it's books, patients, CDs, hotel rooms, et cetera, but really trying to figure out how you're connecting those two. And sometimes it's easy to do it, and sometimes it's hard. But to me, those are that's what you should be looking at. In my view, that's what you should be looking at. What leads are you driving into the system? Are they converting, and are they generating the business that you're looking for?
So maybe some of the other panelists would like to comment also. What are some of the key KPIs and interaction attributes that you measure or would like to measure?
Yeah, this is Ray. I know I mentioned it early on, but in so many instances, and Amy touched upon it as well, the return on your marketing spend, the ROI, did you lower your cost of acquisition of acquiring that new customer? A lot of that is the holy grail of what we'd want to see in terms of marketing spend. But to Amy's point too, is that I think every vertical has different business objectives, and when you're pouring through all this data, customer data, spend data, to be able to correlate really what's the question and what's the thing you're trying to solve for the most. Even in healthcare, when you work with a healthcare system and then you go to perhaps like the urgent care space or immediate care space, it's a whole different perspective, because one's pulling from regional, county level, statewide, international markets, and then the urgent care space really is in the retail side. They're fighting for street corners. They have competition, so we find the metrics there might be, what's the optimal trade area to maximize exposure to my clinic with with competition there. So we spend a lot of time correlating that, drive times, distance calculations for a positive ROI. So that's two examples of the ROI-focused KPIs that many of our clients look for.
Thank you. So, Dana, Chris, anything you'd like to share?
Sure, this is Chris. I'll share that. I think that similar to what Ray talked about a little bit is that we're also looking at what are some ways in which we can do cost savings within the bank. So one example, again, is kind of mobile deposit. So it actually costs a lot less for customers to be able to make deposits from their kitchen table using their mobile phone than it is for them to get in the car and go and drive to an individual banking branch. So if we can look to say, what can we measure that? Can we understand what the cost is for us to build that capability versus the cost of the FTEs in which that we need to staff in order to have them available to take those deposits in those branches on Main Street, and really kind of work through that calculation and looking to, one of the things that we're trying to do is looking to grow that percentage of people who are making those deposits digitally and be able to use that as a cost-saving metrics and drive that within our bank.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Now, one of the things that Amy mentioned quite a few times is around attribution, and I know in my experience, lots of organizations struggle with attribution. Amy, Dana, what are your thoughts on? Let's start with Dana. What are your thoughts on when you can't do attribution, when it isn't possible? What are some of your thoughts on what can or what should you do?
Yeah, that's a great question. And certainly for us, we're in a unique position because while we market direct to consumer, we don't sell direct to consumer. So we're actually marketing to people and then driving them elsewhere to complete their purchase, to actually convert them to a sale. So what we're working with on the data side is second or third hand data on our own sales. So, for us, it's we have so much going on at the same time. So imagine a book just goes on sale. We have major media. We have reviews. We have TV. We have radio. We have our advertising that's going on. We have influencer marketing. So all of these things are happening sort of in concert with each other. So what has been really helpful for us is that as we've developed some of these analytics tools to dig into the data a little bit, even though we can't bring numbers directly about the conversions, we can bring traffic, we can bring insights into consumer behavior and sort of layer those over the trends in the sales. So even though we don't know how many sales we've converted in a certain span of time, we can see traffic spike on our website, we can see people clicking off to a retail site. And so that has actually been really helpful for us to be able to create correlations even when we can't attribute something specifically to a sale.
Thanks. And I think, Amy, you also mentioned some stuff around the correlation side as well. What are your thoughts on attribution and how how to actually do attribution, but when you can't, what can you actually do then?
Yeah, and I thought Dana gave some great examples, and I think I knew intuitively that their business model was that way, but it's fascinating to think about. You're driving marketing, but you're not the point of sale. So how do you make those correlations and causations? Is fascinating. I would say from a healthcare perspective, what the discipline that we've been doing over the past, I would say 5 years or so, is we track what I'll call sort of leading indicators and lagging indicators. And so the lagging indicators are the actual patient volumes, right? The surgery, because there's a very long buying cycle, as you can imagine. I don't even know if you can call it a buying cycle, but there's a very long customer acquisition cycle depending on the type of healthcare need that you're trying to drive. So we'll partner with the areas that the service lines that we're trying to promote, and they'll provide us on a monthly basis what their volumes are. Then we pair that with what we call our leading indicators, and so those would be our call volumes, so calls into the call center, or web volumes. Sometimes it's impression-based, but we really try and get it narrowed down into a form fill or some sort of online conversion point that's meaningful and not just clickbait. So we look at those two, right? So we produce those on a graph, so on a calendar year graph, so we can see how they trend year over year from January through December. And then what we'll do is we'll just map on top of that. We'll just put a line that says radio and market, direct mail, digital programmatic campaign. And we're able to see how those now, and we've been at it for a number of years now, so we can see where there's just simple annual trends in variation, right, versus, I should say, seasonality that are not necessarily affected by marketing. But then we can see when we maybe dial back on, if there's a year where we can't afford TV, so we don't have TV in the market, or we dial up on a direct mail piece, we're able to start to see if there are spikes. Again, we still have that challenge with attribution, but it starts to visualize to see, oh, look, when we have more in market, our leading and our lagging indicators tend to go up versus when we have less in market. Again, it helps validate what we all know intuitively from a marketing perspective, that you need to do a multifaceted campaign. But it helps. Now, we still want to get to attribution, but if you can't do that, at least that starts giving you the data visualization to start seeing how the work you're doing is impacting the business.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about analytics, KPIs, measuring the business, but maybe let's talk a little bit about how to analyze or measure the data itself, since that's such an important piece of analytics. So on the data side, let's talk a little bit about what you do or how you do what you do around validation of the data and measuring the effectiveness of the actual data. So Ray, maybe you could talk about what you've been seeing out there.
Sorry, our perspective probably comes from our DNA and being originally being a direct marketer. We've always been real used to one-to-one, building predictive models, using compiled data, and that we found that as obviously the digital space has grown, there's more data out there. we just felt there wasn't enough transparency into effectively doing that one-to-one. So a lot of what we've done, the verticals that we work in, are specifically geared around being able to talk one-to-one, build a predictive model, build attributes so that when we're actually sending digital messages, we kind of have an idea of who we're talking to, and not losing effectiveness or losing efficiency by talking to a wider audience. Because at the end of the day, our clients are tracking transactions. They are tracking, what was the effectiveness of my marketing spend. So if you can do those things, if you can actually measure more of the data up front, understand the audience up front, what you see happen is you do lower that cost of acquisition, because you don't have to talk to a lot of people. You talk to those folks, as I was saying with the DMP, that show in-market signals. So you're able to talk to them and then move on in the inventory. And one of the things you find with these sort of behavioral signals is that if someone is showing interest in your product or service, you don't have to bother them very much. I mean, you can put a few throttled messages in front and then leave them alone and move on in your inventory, because you do want to reduce that annoying factor and be respectful of people's time. So again, segmenting up front, really understanding who your target audience is before you go and start engaging online will produce really positive results from a perspective of lowering costs of acquisition and obviously getting closer to that return on marketing investment.
Thanks, Ray. Now, Chris, you had mentioned, for instance, as a financial institution, you can see, for instance, if payments are being made to competitors, et cetera. This actually brings up an interesting angle, which is when you're personalizing marketing efforts, of course there are legal and actually there's also perception type challenges that people face. So on the legal side, of course, there's privacy laws that we all have to comply with. And on the perception side, I'm sure we've all had that moment where we're just starting to think about, some to purchase something or some trip that we want to take, and all of a sudden we start seeing messages, come in our email, or we text messages that seem to, coincidentally or not coincidentally, align with, those thoughts. So it's almost seemingly like magic. That, of course, sometimes can have that little bit of that creepy factor. So can you talk about how you ensure privacy, Chris, and on a somewhat related topic, also in your marketing, avoid that creepy factor?
Yeah, I think that we are in a position where at least the rules and regulations within finance help to make sure that we protect what's called PII, or personally identified information. So I think that that's kind of an important thing that we do. We don't necessarily, in those ads, using a simple example, we don't use your name to say, hey, I know that you're specifically looking for this particular product, but, we can at least try and target those. So I think that's an important thing to make sure that we consider as well. But, hopefully we catch that person's eye, hopefully that targeted ad that is on a specific product as they've been talking about it or researching on it really kind of lets them know. And again, specifically for us, lets them know that our institution has that particular product, can help to meet those needs. But again, we definitely have to make sure that we follow our regulations and don't divulge any kind of personally identified information.
Thanks. Amy, any comments from you on the healthcare side? Of course, that's also a highly regulated space.
Yeah, it certainly is very highly regulated. I mean, like Chris, we have to protect it's PHI in our industry, personal health information. So we have to be very careful around what we're pushing out and how we target. But we'll do it more based off of persona. So, for example, if we do a direct mail, we're going to base it off of the persona related to that, but maybe not exactly call out the person's name. But yeah, it's we've got those rules and regulations that we need to follow, and how do we manage around that, but yet still tailor in a way that will resonate with that consumer.
So I think this will be our last question that we have time for. But we've talked a lot about process, we've talked a lot about technology, analytics, data, etc. but I know that in many organizations, culture can play a big role in it. Sometimes there's not necessarily a data culture within companies. So how do you facilitate and enact a cultural shift within a company so that the organization starts focusing more on the data as opposed to that kind of gut instinct, which many of us like to rely on? So maybe Amy, what's been your experience?
Yeah, I think you just have to start doing. I mean, just start tracking, but build in the rigor within your team to start tracking, because you can talk yourself out of it all the time, but I think you just have to pick something that matters and track it and learn from it, and continue to educate your internal clients, if you have them, on the importance of tracking this data from a marketing perspective. And over time, they will learn and be excited. You can also talk with your internal clients on what are those measures they're looking for to help demonstrate the effectiveness in marketing. And where you can have those and track them, just start tracking and learning. And then over time, you'll learn from it and be able to build more robust internal models, and you'll develop your own muscle memory, so to speak, so that you build those capabilities, and then over time you realize that you've really created a data-driven organization. But it does take time. It's not going to happen overnight.
Thank you. So Chris, any insights into this as well?
Sure. I think being in banking and finance, we're probably not in a lack of being data-driven. Definitely, I think a lot of our senior leaders here want everything to be quantifiable. I think one of the disciplines that I've learned is being able to quantitatively measure the qualitative aspects as well. So things like sentiment and Net Promoter Score, CSAT, and reviews are all really important for us as well. But just basically doing the simple math of tallying those up. So we've got a number of reviews around a certain thing, or we've got a number of things around feedback around something else, really kind of understanding what does that mean, how does that drive our interactions, what does that mean as far as fixes that we need to do from a technical perspective, as well as being able to prioritize additional enhancements. Obviously, the more people who are chiming in and asking about something maybe is something that we need to fast track versus something that we aren't hearing as much feedback about.
Thanks, Chris. So now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Laura for some of the audience Q&A.
Absolutely. Thank you to our panelists and Bob for doing such a great job moderating, and to Ray for a great opening presentation. We are now going to review some questions that were submitted from the audience during the discussion. So the first question we have here: how does a targeting strategy change for customer acquisition and marketing with regards to brick and mortar versus online products?
Was that to a specific person? Or?
No, this is open to the group.
Well, I can speak to that. This is Dana. And I jump in here because I think publishing was one of the first industries to sort of be disrupted by the digital side of things and to react successfully and pivot. So for us, it's a sort of flight of communication that we're not necessarily telling people where we want them to go, but there is a natural correlation between online ads and social that drives online sales versus traditional media, TV, print, that skews a little bit more towards brick and mortar. But again, for us, the message is more about who are we looking for and what are we trying to say to them to drive them to their choice of retail. So hopefully that answers the question a little bit.
Yeah, Dana, I just wanted to add to that if I'm reading this right, with online products, you're typically talking about e-commerce, where you have to make that purchase. You have to fill out a shopping cart and make that purchase online. So you're pretty much at that point of sale. What happens a lot in marketing with brick and mortar is that folks will see messaging, impressions, and kind of do their own research, come back 3 days later, and then perhaps visit the brick and mortar. And so backing up and figuring out, what messaging, what channel was I actually engaging with this person? Am I able to even see that engagement if they've gone off and come back 3 days later? So there are subtle differences to that. One, you're right there making the purchase, and the other is a little more influence to come to the brick and mortar. So it certainly requires looking at it from both perspectives.
This is Chris. I'll probably add to that as well. I think an earlier comment around really watching your leading and lagging indicators is about the best that we can do right now. We're still working on attribution. But I think for us to really kind of understand, similar to what was just talked about, in the sense that we can have people who open up accounts or start to do certain financial services products online. However, the majority of people like to do that in person, where they like to look the person in the eye, shake their hand, especially in regards to large sums of money. But really kind of understanding, if we've had a lot of stuff in market, a lot of stuff in digital, does that lead to more traffic in our banking centers? Does that lead to further digital sales as well? But really kind of making sure that we understand what our on and off messages are and what kinds of things actually drive, really, at the end of the day, to further growth in our business, regardless of what that channel is.
Great, and we had a follow-up question that came in for Dana. How are you able to track how customers are reacting to the content that you're putting out there?
Well, there's a lot of different ways. So we're just now starting to be able to track inbound traffic to our website. So that's really helpful. We can see exactly which pieces of content are driving the highest traffic. We also dig into consumer reviews. We do this with social listening tools, but also by literally reading reviews to find out what people are responding to the most. So when, say, we have a big book out now that touches on a lot of different pieces of culture. It's a big Think Science book, so we have the science book. It has a mainstream podcast that really got behind it and drove a lot of sales. And then it had an endorsement by a big celebrity who sort of had the more lifestyle angle. So we're able to extrapolate those different messages and test them into those audiences and just look at our results from those ads to see which message is resonating the highest in their audience, and then go for more of those consumers.
Great, thanks, Dana. And another question that just came in is, what is the best source of customer data, and what type of communication tools do you use to reach out to them? Anyone want to take a stab at that one?
Well,
this is
sure,
Amy. I can share. Oh, go ahead, Ray.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Amy. Go ahead. You have a lot of customer data.
I would just say the best source of customer data is your own, obviously, because those are real customers, and you can start doing your modeling off of that. And then after that, there are lots of different places you can purchase, right, from, where you can use different CRM tools to, target Experian data or others. But if you have your own customer data, that's the best place to start, so that you can figure out what your target audience or your personas are, and then find others to purchase.
Yeah, Laura, I'll just underscore what Amy said, because so much of what you see in your own customer data, especially we talked a little bit earlier about attitudinal data. Sounds like Amy was doing it at Emory, and we've had some experience with it in some of our business verticals. But really, it tells you exactly how and what channels where they like to communicate, how they like to receive their communication. So really, it's listening to what your customers are asking you to do, and then being able to extrapolate that into your leads or prospects or other compiled forms. But start with your customer data, and you can't go wrong.
Great, thank you. And it looks like we have time for just one more question. So what are some effective strategies your organization has implemented to recapture customers with promotional efforts?
I'll just give one example. Telecom. I was showing a chart earlier with telecom signals online, the DMP, and what we found with some of our customers and their existing customers or existing customers on their plans is that there'll typically be a time limit when you have to renew your contract. And so when it's roughly a month or two out, you start communicating with them. And what we found was from some of those signals in the DMP was that folks were actually starting to research and poke around prior to that renewal period. So being able to utilize those insights to actually see when your customer was raising their hand and showing in-market signals and be able to effectively get to them prior to even your own renewal marketing campaign was hugely effective. So, again, it was paying attention to your existing customers, providing insights that might tell you when they actually want to engage in those types of cycles, whether it be seasonal. I think Amy mentioned some of the seasonal things that you see in traffic. It's the same way in telecom.
Hi, this is Chris. I'll take that one as well. I think one of the things that we've done is just listen to our customers. We've had some people who have left us because our feature set and our actual offering itself wasn't as competitive as it could be. So we've made improvements. We reached out to those customers and let them know that those improvements were made, and definitely saw some recapture and have them come back. And so far they seem to be more satisfied with what we have to offer.
All right. Anyone else have anything to add? All right, great. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us for this fantastic virtual event today, and to our esteemed speakers for sharing their insights with our audience. So I'd like to thank everyone again, and enjoy the rest of your day.